Hi everyone, it's Cable here, and yes, we are in fact doing another Pink Floyd related video. This time I wanted to take a deeper look at their 1972 album, Obscured by Clouds, the soundtrack album to that of La Vallée. Now, if you haven't seen my Pink Floyd Worst to Best video yet, I recommend that you do check it out, but I'll give a brief rundown of where Pink Floyd were at this point in time. You see, back in 1971, they had released their sixth full-length studio album, Metal, and while it wasn't a huge commercial success, at least in the US, it definitely showcased the direction that Pink Floyd were taking their overall sound in, and they would begin the process of creating what would become their eighth studio album, The Dark Side of the Moon. However, during that time, they were commissioned by Barbet Schroeder, whom they had worked with previously, to compose the music for his newest film, La Vallée. So the band spent about 2 weeks or so writing and recording music for said film, and in June of 1972, that soundtrack album would be released as Obscured by Clouds. Naturally, because this is a film soundtrack, and because it's also sandwiched in between two of Pink Floyd's most pivotal albums ever, it tends to be pretty overlooked whenever people do a deep dive on Pink Floyd's discography. Like, I feel like people bring up Pink Floyd's other soundtrack album, 1969's More, way more frequently than they do Obscured by Clouds. Maybe it's because when More was released, Pink Floyd was still trying to find their sound after Syd Barrett departed, and as a result, More feels like a necessary stepping stone in their overall evolution. Whereas with Obscured by Clouds, if you were to completely remove that album entirely from their history, not much would have been different. If anything, Obscured by Clouds could feel like a slight regression of sorts. However, and this is what really fascinates me, there seems to be this loyal fan base towards Obscured by Clouds. It's not huge by any means, but if you look, you'll definitely find people calling this Pink Floyd's most underrated album. And while I wouldn't call it my favorite Pink Floyd album, I did rank it at a measly number 9 on my Worst to Best video. There is something fascinating about this album that has always attracted me to it ever since I really started getting into music in general. It's kind of like rooting for the underdog in some sense because, yes, I do find it annoying that this album tends to get overlooked by so many people, and I wish that more people would actually, talk about this album as frequently as other Pink Floyd albums. Okay, maybe that's asking a bit too much from them. Even though there are people who will go to bat for Obscured by Clouds, they're definitely a minority group, because most people who will choose to listen to this album will either think it's just good and leave it at that, or in the most baffling cases, they'll deem it the worst Pink Floyd album ever, which, I'm sorry, but don't you think that's a bit too much? Now, second worst, sure, I could understand that entirely, but are you seriously going to tell me that More is a better album than Obscured by Clouds? Yeah, I'm not buying that. I guess I should probably explain why it is I prefer Obscured by Clouds to More, now that I mentioned it. I think one reason boils down to the fact that even though both are film soundtracks, the latter doesn't really feel like one. Sure, nearly half of the songs on the album are instrumentals, but it can honestly pass for its own thing. I'd also say that it flows pretty nicely as well. Like, it's not super complicated, and I don't think it flows as immaculate as, say, Dark Side of the Moon, but still, it doesn't flow horribly, is what I'm trying to say. However, above all else, the songs on Obscured by Clouds are on average better than the songs off of More. The highs are admittedly higher than the ones off of More, and the lows aren't as bad as the lows off of More. In fact, I'd say that the worst Obscured by Clouds gets, in my opinion, is just okay. But yeah, enough of me rambling about that. Let's just talk about the songs on Obscured by Clouds now. There are 10 of them scattered across 40 minutes, and it opens with the pair of tracks, Obscured by Clouds and When You're In. Now, I'm talking about these songs as a pair because not only is this the only case where one song flows directly into another, but the two clearly play off of each other. With the title track, it features this lone drone as more instrumentation gets added into the mix, and as the song reaches its end, it begins to fade out, only for the drums on When You're In to bust through the mix, and the band starts to jam out a little bit. It makes for a pretty neat pair of intro tracks on the whole. After that, we get the song Burning Bridges, and this is kind of silly of me looking back, but when I first heard this song, I thought the song was being very literal. Like, I pictured an actual bridge that you would find at like a park or something catching on fire and the flames consuming its surrounding land. I wasn't aware of it being a metaphor for severing ties with someone you know. Whatever, I still tend to have that image in my head, and the song itself is also rather melancholic. Like, there's definitely a feeling of regret looming over this track, and on the whole, as the first I don't know, actual song of the album. It's pretty great, and I said it gives off this more low-key vibe that I feel like most of the album will explore more. That being said, the following The Gold It's In The is more of a hard rocker, and while I don't hate it, I think it's overall okay. It does admittedly feel a bit out of place when compared to the rest of the album. I remember seeing someone comment on my Pink Floyd Worst to Best that they thought that Money off of Dark Side of the Moon felt out of place, and that's honestly how I feel about this song being on this album. Still, not bad, but definitely my least favorite on the album. However, following that, we get a very great 3-track run, starting with the song What's the Deal? Yeah, weird song title, I know, but the song is really great. It feels like having a warm blanket while stuck inside during a snowstorm, or maybe it sounds like hanging out with loved ones for dinner, again during a snowstorm. Chances are, if it's related to warm feelings during a snowstorm, that's probably what I think whenever I listen to this track. I'm not sure if this song or the next one is my favorite song off the album, but if it isn't, it's pretty darn close. And yeah, like I said, it's great. Speaking of the next track, Mudmen is essentially an instrumental reprise of Burning Bridges, and yeah, I love it. It feels just as melancholic as Burning Bridges, and I just love how David Gilmour makes his guitar sound like it's crying on this track. There's not really a whole lot that I can really say about this song, but make no mistake about it, it's definitely a highlight for me on the album. Childhood's End opens side 2 of the album, and it features a beat that is actually pretty similar to that of Time off of Dark Side of the Moon. And that's another thing about this album that fascinates me. While none of the actual songs on here would make Dark Side of the Moon, there are these hints of ideas that would spring forward onto Dark Side that kind of show where the band was headed towards in hindsight. I think it's really cool, and yeah, this song is amazing too. We then get Roger Waters' Free For, which lyrically deals with his father's death, and it's ironically a pretty upbeat song. Like, I could easily see myself listening to this song with a boisterous crowd in a pub or something like that. It's also worth mentioning that if you've heard Roger Waters' recent take on Dark Side of the Moon, then you might recognize that the spoken word passages on Speak to Me and Breathe are literally just the lyrics off of Free For. I know that's not really a fun fact necessarily because that album is not really all that good, but I don't know, I figured it's worth pointing out regardless. The penultimate track, Stay, is next, and it's also the last song with any lyrics on the album. And it deals with sleeping with a groupie only to end up forgetting about the whole ordeal by the end. It's another song that has a certain melancholy towards it, and as the final main song of the album, it's pretty nice. Finally, the album closes on Absolutely Curtains, and it's essentially an ambient track with a little build-up towards the middle, and it ends with this folk section done by the Mapuga tribe, which is certainly an interesting way to close out the album. It's not necessarily my favorite song on the whole album, but it's still pretty neat regardless. And yeah, that's basically all I really wanted to say about the actual music of Obscured by Clouds. Overall, I just think it's a rather underrated album in the grand scheme of Pink Floyd's discography, or perhaps even music in general. It has this overall relaxed vibe that I just find fascinating, and it's honestly one of those albums that's just nice to put on once in a while. I hope that to all the fans out there who love this album will appreciate the fact that I talk about it in somewhat more detail, I guess. I don't know. And while I don't think this is like an essential album for anyone trying to get into Pink Floyd, if you are a Pink Floyd fan and haven't heard this yet, then yeah, definitely give it a try. I can't guarantee you'll find as much fascination with it as I do, but it's still an album that I think deserves at least a little bit more credit than it's usually given. And yeah, that's basically all I have to say about this album. I hope you all enjoyed listening to me ramble about Obscured by Clouds of all things. And I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.